as a company, we make thousands of products a year. I mean, in-house, we manufacture the products here. So we know what it takes to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But can you imagine making 100 million of something, of anything?
No, not really.
Yeah.
But it turns out a lot
So
of companies
different.
do it, actually. You take something like this. This is a ubiquitous product to some extent.
Apple's
AirPod Max.
AirPod Max.
Yeah. You see these occasionally on the streets.
And AirPods in general.
Well, AirPods, yeah. You see those all the time. The little things you stick in your ears.
We looked up some numbers, and they sell something like 100 million pieces of those a year, literally.
Yeah.
A little more, a little less, depending on the year. But headphones in general, like things that you stick in your ears or on your ears, 100 million pieces a year. So they got it down. They do it. It's a real product. So how do they do it? How do they do that? And can you? I mean, it's kind of a tight-held secret when you look at it. There's not a lot out there on it.
It's curious because manufacturing is always a thing that is foundational to having a product in your hand. It needs to be made if you want to have it, and yet it's not often discussed, and oftentimes it's kind of like mysterious and in the shadows. Nobody wants to show it because it's complicated, sometimes a little dirty.
I mean, we own their products. You have,
Yeah.
we have headphones. You have we all have iPhones. We all have something. We're in the Apple ecosystem. Computers,
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? So so I guess you could say from a consumer standpoint, we sure as hell understand how to buy a lot of these pieces. I mean,
isn't that their goal?
Yeah, well, totally. Yeah. I mean, you think about it. There's probably 20 pieces of Apple in this building, easy. And we're just a small build. We're just a small company. We're not doing,
Yeah, well,
we're not
show
doing-
iPads and such,
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, we use 6, 7 iPads at trade shows.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone here has an iPhone, pretty much almost everyone. And, we got pieces like this around. So, yeah, I mean, bottom line, though, is that, we've got computers on our desks. So, I mean, think about that. I mean, I guess they're doing it, and they're doing way over probably hundreds of millions of pieces of total.
Yeah.
But can you imagine that, like the process, like, let's speculate. Like we're going from many thousands to, let's say, many hundreds of thousands. Let's at least go up by a scale factor of that much. What would it take? What do we got to do? Where would you start?
Well, it's sort of always the dream, I think, of any product designer to ship more units. And it's one of those things that's incredibly challenging because it needs to be affordable enough that that many people could physically afford to buy it. And then they need to want to buy it. And you got to make it. You got to distribute it. You got to get it to the customer. So there's a lot of layers, in fact, to the actual total system of delivery.
Can you imagine assembling hundreds of
Well, that's the
thousands
problem.
of pieces?
Things that weren't a problem before, that you didn't even think about being a problem, are now a problem.
Yeah, as you scale.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you think about it. I mean, we run into these little things on a daily basis while you're doing things. And you've done these things over and over again repetitively, and you still run into these little issues here and there that have to be resolved. And can you imagine multiplying that by 1,000 or 100 factor of 100,000? It'd be
Or a
crazy.
million, or 100 million.
You obviously need people. I mean, the one thing I can see for sure is like you need a lot more people, and you need people in between the people just to solve the problems. So the people making the stuff keep making things.
Right.
You can't have the whole ship stop because of a problem, right? It's just got to it's got to flow.
With us, you even look at the time required to buy stuff. Because, of course, we can't manufacture from raw, stuff out of the ground.
We don't make the
something,
aluminum,
right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
We don't make the materials.
Yeah,
We
we're
buy
not
the
refining
materials.
the materials.
Right.
Okay, so you
Yeah.
buy them from suppliers that specialize.
We don't
in
buy
this.
we don't make the lambskin that makes up the ear pads. We
Yeah.
don't make the foam that makes up the interior of the ear
But
pads.
sometimes on like Apple scale, you kind of need to do that then. It hits a scale where nobody can supply you.
Or their suppliers need to do that.
Right. Oh,
You
yeah,
know,
or that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But still, you need a layer. So that's one answer, right? You need layers to this. There has to be multiple layers going back through the supply chain to deal with this, who are all in sync with each other continuously.
Yeah, it's complicated. Because when you're actually making hundreds of millions of things, getting the actual stuff, just the raw materials to make the thing, it's got to come from somewhere. It's got to exist. It comes from somewhere in the world, wherever you could get it. But you need a lot.
I guess one thing in the middle is like car manufacturers.
Yeah, I was just thinking,
Yeah.
like during
You know?
COVID, when nobody could get chips, right? And then they kept making the cars, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, they couldn't ship them because, we need this for this.
No
and
computer.
this. So it's a problem immediately, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
that was a a gross example of how bad it could get when the supply chain falls apart.
Yeah.
And all it takes is one key component,
Yeah,
right?
they made everything else.
Lesson learned, yeah.
Right.
And I mean, that's a key, that's definitely. But you could see though how fragile that chain is really when you look at it.
Well, that's the
in
thing.
order to have that continue.
Everybody saw it. That it was such a gross example of it. Now everybody's worried about it. So now everybody's trying to,
So
get ahead of it.
looking at it the other way, so you need to assemble a chain like that never stops. It never sleeps. It's always going. It's continuous because that's what happens when it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing freezes.
It's an incredible coordination. And at thousands, this isn't something you need to be too concerned about. You could stockpile 100 pieces of something, maybe even thousands. But tens of thousands starts to get a lot. Hundreds of thousands, it's getting messy.
Yeah. I mean, at our volume, we basically created in-house buffers for things.
Yeah.
We buffer everything.
Yep.
We buffer materials. We buffer everything. We
You have no choice.
We try to keep ahead of everything rather than falling behind. If you need to assemble a headphone, the ear pad's already sitting there waiting to go on the headphone. The leather headbands are already waiting there as part of the assembly. The inner steel band is already waiting there for you. If it isn't, then that whole process stops. And fortunately, we don't have enough people here to worry about it. You move on to something else because we're all multitasking here anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you do something a little different to kill the time until that something catches up. But we have problems all the time where a vendor is behind. They promise you on a certain date, and 3 weeks later you get the part.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
There's nothing you could do about it. There's
Yeah.
absolutely nothing you could do about
And
it.
when you're making, if you say 100 million or something a year, weeks of no production, well, that's a lot.
Right, you're talking a hell of a lot of loss.
Yeah.
Not the money, not to mention the amount of people.
Well, it's more
involved.
than that. It's much more
Well,
than
everything
that.
else
It's
will
actually
be
a severe
piling
issue.
up if you're still
Right.
working on it too.
Because the people still exist.
Right.
Every other supplier that you negotiated with, that you said, we need this number of pieces on this date, well, they don't know. They're still running. So you need to tell everyone that your suppliers that are making the things, stop. We don't have anywhere to put your, million pieces of
The
just
trucks
screw or
keep
something.
showing
Yeah, they're
up.
still
The
coming.
truckloads of stuff keep
Yeah.
showing up, but it's
It
not
breaks
flowing
everything.
through, and
It
we have
breaks-
nowhere to put it because you're not
It's
made to
damaging.
store for that kind of length of time.
Well, same thing
Yeah.
with the automotive thing, as you said. They made all those trucks and everything. They had to put them all somewhere, and the cars are big, right?
Yeah, they
So
were finding empty mall
lots
parking
just
lots and
filled
stuff like
with
that to
vehicles.
store it in.
And then,
You know.
even when you say you did get them, well, now you got to take them all out of storage and then complete them, and then.
But see, these are
ship 'em
problems you
out.
run into that's a growth pains. That's kind of a way to look at it from the standpoint of what a growth pain would be as you expand your manufacturing chops, right? But what else? I mean, you think about it. In order to sell that many product, you need a completely different supply chain. You're not dealing with a few dealers here and there. You're dealing with a distribution
Well, yeah.
network.
Well, yeah, I mean, they
know.
like call up FedEx and we're like, we just need every plane you got leaving our facility.
Pretty
full.
much.
You
And
know, you
then
can't
some.
just be like, oh, we'll just
Well, from what
drop
I-
out 50,000 boxes on them one
From
day.
what I understand, FedEx dedicates planes
do.
for the product. They
Yeah.
already know, and I'm sure it's already planned out how
Well,
much space they're going to allocate for new product launches. All
Yeah.
this stuff has to be planned
Because
by,
it would have
by
to be.
teams of
It
people.
would have to be.
Yeah.
You'd have to negotiate this with all your contractors in advance. Let them know we expect to ship this amount on this date or whatever.
Exact
I would
cubic
assume there's teams
meters
that deal
needed,
with this.
space to ship it.
Sure.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
like if we ship 20 headphones in a day, UPS doesn't notice.
I mean, you think
It
about
doesn't
the
affect anything.
planning involved just to maintain the supply chain going through the process of manufacturing and then going out to distribution. That whole thing is nonstop coordination.
Mhm.
Any part of it gets messed up, log jammed, whatever you want to call it.
It's curious
it becomes
because
a real problem real
the
quick.
complexity gets out of control as you scale in volume. And at thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands in some cases, not so much. You could almost get away with batch manufacturing at those scales, like where you make a certain amount of these items and then you ship. They go into a warehouse, they get picked or whatever, and they go out to the customers. But as you scale, batch manufacturing doesn't really work anymore. You can't make 1,000 of something, 10,000 of something, put them somewhere, and then expect to deliver 100 million at the end of
It's
the year.
way more
right?
of a
It needs to be a
continuous
continuous
process.
process where it's
Yeah.
like every step along the way, there's people making sure and managing that everyone's doing what they need to be at the right time, and then the parts they need to put together or whatever it is are going to be there at the right time, and their suppliers all have the materials they need.
We tried to find some videos or something. We call it B-roll, but some background information on the manufacturing process of some of these products by Apple, and it doesn't really exist. So we're going to attempt to show, we've got some stuff to show, but unfortunately, they're obviously, like most manufacturers, that stuff isn't public. Their processes, the way they handle things, with Foxconn, whoever this stuff is, the only people that know how it works are the people that are in the building.
I mean, you could see why, as in a continuous processing is important, because if you only had a certain number of machines and you had to like switch out tooling and everything, and then something could go wrong when you switched it, and then you have more downtime, and everything would just fall apart every day.
Well, I did
so
it.
you need dedicated machines that only do one thing.
Well, yeah, and I think in Apple's case, don't they just have like rows and rows of CNCs that are all making the same part constantly, right?
Well, it's kind of a dream, actually, when you hit big enough scale manufacturing. It's not even that you have rows of machines, but you have 10 machines, 50 machines, 100 machines that do one process. You don't change anything. Part goes in, part comes out, and it's continuous, just running, right? So you don't need to fiddle with the stuff as much. This just does this. You have a person that just does this one thing over and over and over. So it's simple problems, but there's so many simple problems.
Well, and the reason is I did a calculation real quick, and I took like the number 70 million. Let's say you do 70 million pieces.
Yep.
And you shave off 1 second of time total to make 70 million pieces. That comes out to 810 days of time. That's 1 second.
Right.
All right. So now, can you imagine adding or subtracting seconds throughout a year of this process? How many, you go from 70 million seconds is 810 days. So let's say you could save, or let's say something goes wrong and you add 30 seconds to the process. That's like 2,400 days of additional time.
You got to add rows of machines. You got to add another building.
Yeah, and you can't catch back up with the current stuff.
So you could see where the scale of this has to be such that, and I don't even know, how would you figure that out? Like, how do you figure what's optimized at that point? Like, where is optimum?
Yeah, well.
I mean, can you actually, you think they could, I don't even know if there was in manufacturing, there was always like considered a certain scale. And in business in general, there was a scale, I forgot, economy of scale, but you reach a certain scale, and it seemed like it was different for every business. In other words, there wasn't like no rule book where you go, oh, we're going to need 50 people doing this, 20 buildings, we're going to need 150,000 square feet. There was nothing like that. Every business is unique pretty much to itself. And it's got to be the same when you get to this scale. It's got to be like, can you imagine the process of building up to making that many pieces, right? Where it's like, where is the optimum scale? And at what point do you say, I can't make any more? What if you could sell more than anyone in the world could make? I guess that's it. It's end the game there, right? But I would say a company like Apple's pretty much there. I think they're pretty much there.
Well,
I mean,
companies at that scale, it's largely an iterative process. So luckily, demand doesn't show up overnight typically in those volumes. It's not like you wake up one day and say, you know what, I made nothing of this before. And
they can't double
have
their
orders for
current
100 million. And I need to ship it next week. Clearly, that's not going to happen.
it takes a hell of a lot of time to create that, to be able to ramp up to that.
It's really
because
lifetimes.
You're creating
it's lifetimes.
manufacturing facilities. Yeah.
And I think to the consumer, this isn't transparent. It wouldn't be.
But no, like I said, we couldn't find anything.
You buy a product as a consumer. You don't probably care that much the hows and the whys that it's on the shelf, right? You just care, well, here it exists. I could buy this product. However, if this product was made in very high volume, there's lifetimes of experience from dozens, maybe hundreds of vendors and companies that specialize in doing specific tasks to be able to bring that product to your door.
They must make a lot of toilet seats every year. You think about it.
Oh yeah, any home good. Yeah.
Every house has at least one toilet, if not two or three.
Yeah, you think nothing
and
of
every
it,
one of
right?
them's got a toilet. So toilets are bad enough. Making toilets sounds like a lot of work.
Outlets,
Yeah,
switches,
true.
all that
Anyway.
stuff.
Yeah, crazy.
But it's funny because it's almost irrelevant because it's made in such large scale. It seems like, well, it's
just a
everywhere.
commodity
It's
then.
just, you just buy
We
this.
completely take it for granted.
Right,
Yeah.
but someone's got to make it.
Right.
You go to Home Depot, they got 20 kinds of outlets
Well,
on the shelf at any given time in every store all over freaking
Oh, there's so
country.
many. They got 10,000 of these things on the shelf.
Yeah, you
right?
don't
It
even
doesn't-
consider the fact that somebody's got to make these.
Nobody ever considers how many outlets are just in their house until you have to replace them, and you're like, oh man, I got all you.
That reminds me. Remember we were just at Depot or whatever?
Yeah,
They had what were they? They were made in USA again. The outlets.
Yep.
What was Neutron? Who's making it? Who's?
Leventon?
Yeah, they're
Leamington.
making
A lot of
outlets in
them
the
are
US
in the US.
again.
Yeah,
it's
the
awesome.
higher ones always were,
Yeah.
but then the lower.
They went to
ones
Mexico at one
Mexico,
point. It
yeah.
looks like they came back. So anyway, but yeah, bottom line is that it's crazy when we start to imagine what it would take to go and start doing 10-fold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold over what we're doing now. And you're right, it wouldn't happen overnight. There's no friggin' way.
Well, it wouldn't really be scaling. It'd be, all right, we need to start over. Essentially, we need to
Right.
rethink everything.
It's totally different.
The whole supply chain would have to change.
Yeah, we couldn't do
Our
it.
suppliers couldn't make that enough material. We couldn't
No.
get the material. You know.
And they wouldn't be able to scale. You would have to force
Right.
them
Yeah, what are you going to
to
do?
scale.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the issue with small scale. How do you force anyone to do anything?
Yeah.
Because like, well, I don't have enough resources to be able to do what you're asking of me.
Right.
Right. That you need to expect
Yeah,
every
you're asking
supplier
every vendor
to funnel money
expand.
and to figure out
It's
how
a-
to.
Yeah.
They're like,
Make
we
more.
see you're not Boeing. Okay, so there are. I mean, like if like Apple or Boeing or someone
Well,
else,
that's
then
true.
yeah, they will.
There's no way to put the cart before the horse
Yeah.
on this one, because you're right. If you don't have a name,
Right.
they're like, you want how many or
Yeah.
what? With 30-day terms? How many? What? When are you going to pay
Right.
us for it? No.
The checks will probably cash. So if you start money flowing, it'll work. But it's always a slow process
Yeah.
to grow, like that slow iterative process.
So I mean, it's crazy when you think about it, and it's crazy for us to think about it. But sometimes, I mean, there are advantages to being a small company, though. I mean, you
Yeah.
can do things quite differently as a small company than a large company.
Well, yeah, we could
Quite.
stop for an hour, and that's fine.
You don't have 10,000
Yeah,
people
right.
staring
Yeah,
at the
right.
wall.
Well, yeah.
So-
Well, not only that, the supply chain issues are not that big of a deal.
No.
I mean, not only just stopping, but even prior to that, or we're not ordering 100 million of pieces of something every year.
Yeah. And worst case is,
Um,
if we really had to, you can find another aluminum supplier, say,
right.
in a day or two or whatever, and
Some
get it from
some
somewhere
vendors
else.
would be more difficult to replace than others
Sure.
because of the certain eccentric ways we go about making things.
It's really the
But
existing
and the learning
infrastructure.
curves involved with our vendors to be able to make things the way we want it. We make the product, right? But we still have to have someone sew the leathers. We don't sew leathers. We don't make foam pieces.
Yep, we get
you
custom
know, someone
tooling
else
made
makes
for
it.
the machines and stuff. That takes time.
Yeah, right. So there are a lot of things that go on in the background before the product actually can be made and assembled. But bottom line is, it's crazy to think about that level and of sophistication involved and the amount of people that it would take and the sheer amount of space involved for these processes to occur from all the way through. It's crazy. I mean, how we don't even know how big is Foxconn. It's got to
It's
be
big.
I think there's numbers online, but it's
yeah.
a small village. Well, I guess I shouldn't say small village. It's like maybe a small country type size. It's the scale of gargantuan.
Yeah, didn't he have like 1 million people working
It's a
there at
lot,
some point?
yeah.
It's a
a
lot,
million
yeah.
people every day coming in, eating lunch, going to the bathroom.
Well, it's the
just
thing,
think of the,
just
the
that,
issues
just
within the
people
place.
eating.
1 million
Yeah,
people in
it's a
one
problem.
spot. We do a football game where we get the Bills play once in a while.
Yeah.
You get 80,000 people in the stadium. That's pretty smooth because most of them do it every week. They're
Right.
used to it. But, that 10, 15% that aren't there, really what bogs things down. Don't know how to go through the gate, don't know how to go through the scan, don't know they can't bring
Well,
in
it's like the
beverages.
airport.
They can't. Yeah, it's like, right. It's like, the airport's a bigger example of
Yeah.
the same thing, right? And it's the same deal where there's
When
always...
you look at airport, there really isn't even that many people there comparatively. It's not million people to 100 million people
Yeah,
in the
you're
airport,
right.
and it's
Yeah.
still such a mess.
There's barely
so much
1,000
chaos.
at any given time.
Yeah, going through
And
security.
it looks like a train wreck every time you're there.
Always, right?
Yeah, right. So, you think about that's a process that is absolutely chaotic. And that's not possible in any manufacturing process.
Right.
You're never going to survive.
Well, it's like there's only like one person at a time going through the metal detector, right? It's not very parallel. You only got only so many.
Yeah.
3, 4,
Well, you
5.
could stack up 100 of them if you want.
Well, yeah,
It's
but
kind
they
of going
don't.
to a supermarket. How many registers can
Right.
you open to cashiers? But yeah, you're right. In the end, it's people. It's
Yeah.
how many people can you have doing the same thing. It's a very repetitive process. So, but yeah, in that sense, I mean, you could see why a company like Apple doesn't make the stuff. They pay vendors to make the
It
product
doesn't
for
scale.
them. They engineer it. They market it. They distribute it, but they don't really make the stuff. you
Yeah,
know?
well, if your demand is so variable, if you need to have 10 million or tens of millions of things ready for a launch as soon as possible, and then demand will kind of be sharp at the beginning and then fade off. Does it make sense to invest in the infrastructure, the personnel and the training and all that, the building and stuff like that, just to be able to meet this sharp demand that kind of...
Yeah, at that level, the vertical integration
Doesn't work.
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't make any sense. And you know what? Actually, at that scale, you could see where it's proven out by them and other companies where it makes sense to stay focused on what you're good at, right?
Mhm.
I mean, and it's obvious they figured that
Well,
out.
that's the thing. There's only so many places that can actually do that, though.
True.
Because like Foxconn in particular, they don't only make Apple stuff; they make stuff for other people too. So they're like gigantic, you know.
And presumably they work with a long list of vendors
Right.
that they're experts in their field
Right.
and doing whatever it is they need to do, supplying the resources that they need.
Yeah, they don't make the
to actually do the
CNCs.
manufacturing.
Obviously, they buy them from someone else.
Right. And they're not doing a lot of mining.
Right.
They're getting the resources from people that are
Well, and
experts in their
it makes
field.
sense that in the end, at that volume, you need to spread out the responsibility as much as possible because it's just you can't contain that much manufacturing in one place too easily.
Yeah.
You have to.
Well, yeah, if you had to do literally everything.
Yeah, it would be really difficult to
It would
do.
be tough.
Really difficult to do.
But it's curious because it almost gets simpler at that scale, right? When you're small, you have to do everything end to end, and there's no other way around it. Now you could have obviously people help you. You could have people do big chunks of it. They could, I'll assemble.
or vendors.
Sure.
Yeah, other companies.
Right. They'll assemble a part for you. They'll give it to you. They'll deliver it. You put
A
it
lot of
together.
companies
You ship
do
it.
that. A lot of
Absolutely.
companies
Most
actually
companies
don't
do.
make anything in the U.S., even on a smaller scale.
Most companies do. It's in a lot of ways it's a sensible thing to do. You get a little less control, but it's predictable. You know it'll be okay.
Well, yeah, everything becomes more specialized once you start talking that volume.
Laser focus,
Yeah,
though.
right.
That's the
Everybody's
key, right?
only working on one
So
thing.
you have 1 million people, but they're doing one tiny little task. So it's like sort of simple, but it's an impossible number of simple tasks. So you got to oversee it all, make sure it all flows.
Yeah. So you have it. On that
Yeah.
note, we should probably stop boring people and move on to
That's pretty
the next
exciting.
topic. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Happy New Year to everybody. 2025 is a good year. Take care.